What's up, everybody? This is your girl Leah B, and I welcome you to In the Mix, where I provide a history lesson on your favorite genres of music. So let's get into this episode. This episode is about the 1980s and the golden era of hip hop music. So the reason why I chose the 1980s is because myself, I was born in the 80s. Shout out to all my 80s babies in the listening to this podcast episode today. 1984, to be exact, was my year of birth, so I have to represent for my 80s crew. So let's get into the episode. So the 1980s was quite a huge decade for pop culture, especially for music. Most notably, the hip hop movement. During the decade, hip hop music had made a significant impact on the culture and music in general. A shift had happened due to new technology. By the 1980s, the hip hop movement had crossed over to the mainstream. And during that time, music was going into a different direction as far as sound is concerned. So during the early years, when like in the 70s of the hip hop movement, hip hop music used a lot of live instrumentation and also used like funk and disco elements. And by that time, disco had faded all the way out. Disco was dead. And when the 80s came around, the sound of hip hop music changed. And the sound that changed was because they were using computers and like drum machines and synthesizers as well. So it was very computerized and um, very like drum beat ish. So, and plus during that time, the computer just came out. So like it was like the big mainframe computer. So people didn't have like personal computers and laptops and stuff like that during our time. But if they did, you worked or they were extremely expensive. So, but the use of live bands and live instrumentation, diversity, quality, innovation, influence, and content. The biggest themes were innovation and content and influence. The content of the hip hop movement during that time was a lot different than when it first came out because it was a form of escape for inner city youth in New York City during that time and what was going on in the Bronx during that time. And also, the content during that time was about having a good time and having fun and just enjoying life and everything. Also, the lyrics has shifted from having a good time to a social, um, political conscious theme. The signs of the time also played a big part of what was going on in the world at the time. And also, DJs were back, uh, put to the back. But they were still relevant, but they weren't in the forefront like they once were because the artist was taking their spot. And plus, they were behind the scenes and they were becoming producers at that time. So there was no use for them being in the spotlight. So and when the artist would do spot live shows and everything, the DJ would become the hype man for the artist. Also, another thing that played a big part in hip hop was radio. Radio was always around, but it changed hip hop for good because artists was able to get their music played to a larger audience instead of being on the New York music scene. So, how people will get their music back in the day, back in the early days, like in the 70s, they would go to block parties or the club to listen to the music. And plus, hip hop was not being played during the day on the New York stations. They would only play hip hop at night because they considered hip hop kind of taboo during the day, because during that time they would play, adult contemporary top 40 AC, something clean for the kids to play. So they thought that hip hop at night would be, a little more beneficial to the masses. And plus, they were getting played on AM instead of FM radio. Also, the lyrical content was different as well due to the themes that was being discussed at that time. So the rappers will be talking about, the lyrics will be about battling each other, who is the greatest rapper of all time, and who had the hardest lyrics, and who was just the best of it all. So, and also, America was going through a lot with the whole, just everything in America going on with the crime, the crack epidemic. Stuff was um, just going on. And plus, during that time, hip hop was also used as a tool for social injustice as well. So, not only social justice began to take heed during that time for America, there were other themes that were being used also in the content of rap lyrics. So the other things that would be that would be discussed in the songs was Afrocentric living, drug use, crime, violence, the typical stuff, and just being black in America, pretty much. And black nationalism was a big thing as well. During that time, rappers weren't afraid to express their blackness and being advocates for black people in America. So that type of rap was called message rap. And the artists that were huge at that time who was using messages in their songs was Public Enemy and KSR1. Another theme that was really big was Afrocentrism. If you guys don't know what that means, it's basically the approach of world history that focuses on the history of people of recent African descent. And the message there was a lot more positive, had a more positive vibe, and more so than the militant messages that Public Enemy and KSR1 were talking about in their songs. So the Afrocentric songs would be discuss topics like education, government, and how to enlighten the black community. And another group that came around, it was a collective of sorts. They were called the Native Tongues. So they were like a collective of, let me see, how would I describe the Native Tongues? They were like more, I guess, peace and love, hippie, make love, not war type of group collective. So they came out around the late 80s and into the early 90s. I will talk about the 90s on another episode. So they were known for their positive minded, good natured, Afrocentric lyrics. And they were also known for pioneering the use of eclectic sampling and using jazz in their songs, like jazzy. Their music was kind of, jazzy and free and everything. And they would talk. Their lyrics were kind of abstract and open minded. That they would also talk about God in their songs and the modern day way of living and just having a good time. And they would also talk about race and relationship as well. So those artists were like made up of De La Soul, the Jungle Brothers, and a tribe called Quest. Q-Tip was in that group. And also another group that was in there was Arrested. Had that particular sound was Arrested Development as well. But the media medium that changed hip hop and music forever that revolutionized hip hop and music forever was the music video. And that network was MTV. You know MTV. The network that used to play video, now they're just playing episodes of Catfish. Yeah, that one. They used to be known for music videos, but now they just play reruns of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. So anyway, MTV was launched in 1981, August 1st, 1981 to be exact. This was right around the time hip hop was still in its infancy, but not really. It was starting to become popular, but not yet. Because before then, no artist had visuals that went with their songs. So the only way artists would perform, it would be on like American Bandstand or Soul Train. So as MTV began to expand during the early 80s, a backlash came against them was in 1982 because they were criticized for not playing black artists at all. The only thing they would play was white rock artists from like England, like the group Genesis from the guy Phil Collins was in that group, by the way, and like all these Wham and what was the name of that other group? Oh goodness, they were from the 80s too. I can't think of the group right now, but yeah, those type of groups. And the first person to do that, who broke the racial barrier was the king of pop himself, Michael Jackson, with his song Billie Jean. He made the video Billie Jean because um, he was sick and tired because he wanted black artists to be played. So he literally told them, "I'm not gonna. If you're not gonna play my song, I won't be playing any of my music on your station at all." So when they finally did that, he was like the first one to do it for R&B. But but the group who changed it for hip hop, cause um was Run DMC. MTV and the record executive at like Sony and Warner Brothers, they weren't really feeling in hip hop at that time. They thought it was going to be a passing fad like disco, which definitely faded away. So they weren't feeling it. They was like, no, I just believed that, it wasn't worth my time and energy. The media was not trying to hear no hip hop video. They're like, psh, whatever. Like, no, they was not buying it. They thought like, nah, they'll fade away. But once MTV started playing Run DMC's videos on the channel, which was Rockbox King of Rock and Walk This Way with Aerosmith, that's when they really started to take notice. Like, hip hop might be a lasting thing. But Run DMC was able to cross over to the rock audience, the white rock audience as well. So they were able to, and they will play their video. They were playing their videos for the past like 2 years. And they finally was like, you know what? Hip hop was not a fad. So when MTV realized that hip hop was beginning to become extremely popular, there were two producers that um, decided to come up with a show that just played nonstop hip hop videos. And that show was called Yo MTV Raps. So it was like a top 10 type video show. And the first episode aired in 1988, August 6, 1988. And the ratings of that show was like maybe, I would say, number 4. The ratings was giving it like 4 points, 5 points. But after a week of it being on the air, the show jumped up to a higher a higher um, point. So it jumped up 2 spots higher in the Nielsen ratings than they did before. So after that, that's when the youth started watching it, and the nation started watching it. So a year later, it became a daily production with 2 VJs. They called them instead of DJs. The people on the video shows were known as VJs, video DJs, who would introduce the songs and everything. But the 2 famous VJs who everybody knew, who would play rap videos every afternoon, was known as Ed Lover and Dr. Dre. They dominated the airways in the afternoons. So countless hip hop artists emerged from that show. And credited Yo MTV Raps as ex, exposing hip hop culture to the masses. Once Yo MTV Raps was on the air, other networks began to have their own show, and that network was BET. So they were like, originally BET was the first network to actually have videos for black artists, and Bob Johnson created that, and they were like, they had the show Rap City with Big Tigger and them. Well, at that time it wasn't Big Tigger, it was some other guy, but they started followed suit after that. So the music video has defined hip hop to the masses. So I would say without the music video, I believe the image of hip hop would not be existent. And I mean, it defined hip hop, like music in general, for the longest time. I mean, they would talk about, I mean, everything, fashion. So everything you would see on Yo MTV Raps, it took over everything. So that's why I believe the 1980s was a quite a, a quite interesting and exciting time for hip hop culture because of what happened in the decade, and that's why they call it the golden era of hip hop. So, and that's why I believe the 1980s will always be the era of fun and social awakening. So, guys, I thank you for listening to this episode of In the Mix. And if you like to keep up with me, I am on all social media platforms. If you want to follow this podcast, it is In the Mix is on social media, Instagram and Facebook. So if you want to go on Instagram and follow my podcast page, you're more than welcome to. So it is In the Mix with Leah B. And I'm also on Facebook as well. So be sure to look me up. Also, I plan on creating a website for the podcast and everything like that. So you guys can just have the link. And if you want to listen to it, you're more than welcome to. It's on Apple Podcast and Spotify, Google Play, whatever. So be sure to support a sister, and I hopefully to bring new things to this podcast. And other than that, I thank you for listening. And thank you for listening. Peace and love.